So now when we have implemented user authentication and have the authorization JSON web token and user ID, it's time to implement user authorization. And user authorization is performed every time when an API call is made to your protected web service endpoint. For example, now if API call is made to get user details of a particular user, for example, HTTP GET is made to a URL /users, and then a user ID is provided, this web service endpoint will need to return back user details of a user that has this public ID. Or if HTTP PUT request is called to update user details, this web service endpoint should be protected and only authorized users should be able to perform this request. Or in other words, only that user which has logged in into your application with their username and password should be able to update their user details. So now when user logs in into our application, providing their username and password, we have generated for them a unique access token, and we will use this access token and their user ID in all other requests to make sure that this is an authorized user. So for example, to perform this HTTP PUT request, user will need to provide authorization header and provide this value, bearer, and then the access token. So I'll copy it and I'll go back to HTTP PUT request, and for the header, I will need to provide authorization and then bearer, and the entire access token has to be provided like this. And then I will also have to copy the user ID and provide this user ID in the request here. This way, when this HTTP PUT request is sent, our authorization filter will be able to authorize this user using the access token, and then if authorization is successful, it will use the user ID to perform the operation we have requested, which is to update user details. So in this video, we're going to implement user authorization filter, a filter that will read the header value and will extract the JSON web token and will perform user authorization using this JSON web token. So I'll go back to my project and I will have to create a new filter. I'll create it under WS security package, and that's going to be a new class, and I will call it authorization filter like this, and I will hit finish. Now again, this class is quite large and there's lots of typing, so I'll be copying and pasting little code snippets. The first one is very important. We'll have to make this class authorization filter extend basic authentication filter. And I see I made a little typo in my class name, so I will go and will refactor this class name. So I'll bring up menu, refactor, choose rename, and we'll change to authorization filter. Okay. Now let me import basic authentication filter, import authentication manager, and remove this curly bracket. Now, because we have extended basic authentication filter, there is one method that we will need to override, and I'll paste it here. And that method is called doFilterInternal. Let me import HTTP servlet request and response, filter chain, exceptions, and a couple of these classes: username, password, authentication token, and security context. Okay, when HTTP request is made and this filter is triggered, this method will be called. And because it accepts HTTP servlet request as an argument, we are able to access the request headers, and the name of the header we are taking from the security constants class which we have created. I can open here, so we are reading the authorization header. And when the header is read, I'll bring back my postman. This entire value will be read from the authorization header. Okay, so let's go back to authorization filter. So once we have the header, we're checking if header is not null, and if the header has that token prefix, which is bearer. We also read the token prefix value from the security constants. I'll bring it up. So this is the token prefix bearer We are providing it here in the authorization header. This one is beer. So let's go back to our class, authorization filter. So if the header is null or it doesn't start with beer, we're simply continuing to the next filter that we have in the chain. But if the token is there and it starts with the beer, then we will need to get user password authentication token object. And for that, we'll create a separate function. Once we have that object, we will set it as authentication to the security context holder. And we will continue to the next filter in the filter chain. So let me bring in this getAuthentication function. And this function is already our custom implementation. If this one we need it to override because it comes from the Spring framework, this one is a convenience function and its job is to return user password authentication token. So let's see what we do here. We are sending over to this function the request object. And because we have the request object, we have access to request headers. So we are reading the token from the authorization header, and then we check if this token is not null, we will get rid of this bearer value because we do not actually need it. All we need is this very long JSON web token value. We don't really need bearer, so we cut it off. Let me go back to my filter. And then we're using JSON Web Token Parser to actually parse that token value, decrypt it, and to get user details from that web token. And all this process is not done by us, it's done by the framework, so you don't have to worry about. All we need to do is to provide the token value into this function parse claims, and we will need to provide a correct token secret with which that token was created. So if you generate JSON Web Token with one secret, you cannot decrypt it then with another secret. You will have to use the same secret to be able to extract user details from the JSON Web Token. So let me import JSON Web Token. And now once we have this user object, we'll create a new instance of username password authentication token, and we will give it user and an empty array list. Let me import array list, and that's it. So the username password authentication token object will be returned back to our doFilter internal function, and then it will be set to security context holder. So now when I have this filter created, I will copy the filter name, I will save the work, and I will go back to web security, and I'll have to add this filter to my filter chain. So I have the authentication filter, and I will now add the authorization filter. Like this. Okay, I think we're done here. Let's try running this application and let's try performing user authorization and see if it works. And if it does not, we'll try to fix the issue right away.